Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to tonight's meeting. It really is wonderful to see so many people here. And I must admit, when we started to organise it, you think, will anybody come? And so you just proved that the Kaimais are alive and well. And tonight we've got some really special people here. For example, we've got Simeon Brown. He's driven down from Auckland. He needs to be away by 8:30 because he's got to drive all the way back, and you've got something on at 8:15 in the morning as well.
No, we've got a caucus meeting at 8:30 as well.
Caucus meeting tonight? Oh, right. So anyway, he's got a problem. But we've also...
That's a good problem.
I would like all my Western Bay councillors to stand, please. And I just think you're absolutely wonderful. They've travelled for a considerable distance from Te Puke and Makatu and Kaimais. You've just done us all proud. And Anne out here from Katikati and our Mayor, James Denyer. And he's got a big job tomorrow, but thank you for taking the time as well. I've also got Sam Uppendale and where's Tom Rutherford? What are you doing? Right. There are two new people who one's an MP and the other one's a candidate, and you'll understand why I've been selective as to who should be invited tonight. And because it's really important that we have people who are capable of listening to what people say, our residents say, within the hills, and also to make sure that it's implemented. Because one of the great tragedies that I've experienced in all my years in local government is that Wellington doesn't listen. And then when they get enthusiastic, they dump on us and get it all wrong. So we've got an opportunity to hear from some really good speakers tonight. So who've I missed? So I've got apologies from Sam Kelway. TV1 was going to be here. Gary Brenner has agreed to tape tonight's meeting, and then if Jason Mara is here between the two of you, you'll know how to drop box or whatever you have to do to get it to Sam Kelway because he's looking for it as well. He was caught up in, I think, a murder in Rotorua in the courts. So that's the first one. And the other one that I was having trouble getting the NZTA to come. Take note, Simeon Brown. Great trouble getting them to come. So I thought one of our staff members said at council, contact the regional manager. Frankie, someone, not sure if it's a he or a she. So anyway, emailed Frankie, and that person assured me there would be a representative here from the NZTA. And so I thought, I've got it solved. And then I get a sharp email from David Spears to say, I told you we would not be coming, right? So one of the heroes for the Hills has been none other than NZTA Adam Francis. And there's people here who have worked with Adam over the years, and he listens and he designs and he works and achieves so much. But he just needs decision makers to actually support him. So I've apologised for him, and I think remember the name because he really is great value. And so he was so good, they took him off and put him on speed limit reviews. And so hopefully he'll come back to road safety. So the order of the evening is each speaker will speak for 5 minutes, and all questions will be taken at the end of our speakers. And we're going to start with Gargan Road. Now, Gargan Road, I can tell you that Alan Costa along there at the end, who lives in Thorne Road, rang me and said, my ute will lift those concrete blocks in Gargan Road, and I will put up a sign, which he did, in the middle of the night on Good Friday, and by 3 o'clock the next day they were all shifted. But the NZTA designed the road that goes from Redwood Lane up and around Tauranga. They gave a really good right-hand turn into Gargan Road and a left-hand turn coming the other way. a quick route to go into farmlands or the vets for anybody coming from the northern area and for local people. So the new NZTA comes along, and what do? They close the road. Now, Dennis and Judith McFedrin, they just go through it anyway and work their way around the blocks. But most people who are honest don't do that. So that, Simeon, that's a good example of something that's being designed and taking years to achieve, and there's a route which we could have been using, and fools have stopped us from doing so. And if you could ask the questions of the NZTA here, why it's not opened, we've asked Ann Tolley and she said it's not our problem, it's NZTA's. So just a thought, you can do that too, Sam. You've got the messages and you've got the network, use them. So Gargan Road was the one I was going to start with. So it's an issue, and we have made submissions to Tauranga City Council, but nobody is listening. Maybe tonight we can get some action. The next speaker is Lee Nielsen on Belk Road. Lee, it's all yours.
Thanks, Margaret.
Oh, by the way, we're taking questions right at the end. Hopefully, while Simeon is still here.
Okay, as Margaret said, Lee Nielsen, representing Belk Road. Okay, yeah, I will. Is that better? Okay. My wife and I have lived on Belk Road for just about 40 years, so we're talking from an experience when I make my comments. I'll go through the issues with the Belk Road's intersection with State Highway 29 first, and then tell you about the history we've experienced with NZTA. The key issues are when you turn right off Belk Road towards Tauranga, one needs significant patience because you sit there and sit there and sit there because the line of vision up to your left for vehicles coming off the Kaimais is very limited. Truck and trailers come at speed, mainly to get up the Tauranga Hill. So it's extremely dangerous and has been for many years. Over the years, the locals have actually cleared vegetation up to the left so you can get a better vision because NZTA, who regularly get asked to do so, ignore us. What happens is most truck and trailer units usually have between 6 and 10 cars backed up behind them just by nature. So you sit there and wait. That fleet goes past, next truck and trailer, another 6 to 10 cars. Most of the time, to turn right off Belk Road, heading to Tauranga, you play on the courtesy of a slow vehicle coming off the Kaimais to let you in the queue onto 29. At peak times, around 8 a.m. in the morning and probably 4 p.m. in the afternoon every day, there's traffic tailed back to Omanawa Road, sometimes Ruahihi Road, several kilometres. Long weekends and special events, it's double trouble. They go right back up the Kaimais.
To here one day, I counted.
Up to here. Yeah, not surprising. The land use on Belk Road is, other than a splattering of lifestyle blocks, is namely kiwi fruit, commercial kiwi fruit and avocado orchards. In the season, those heavily loading trucks taking bins to the pack house got to turn right out of Belk Road. They cannot go at speed because they're laden. Additionally, straight across the road from the Belk Road intersection with 29 is a heavy vehicle business that's grown substantially in the last few years. When those heavy vehicles are turning right from Tauranga into their premises, they sit in the middle of 29. There is insufficient room for 3 heavy vehicles, one going up the Kaimais, one coming off the Kaimais, and that business is large trucks trying to turn right into their access. I have seen it regularly where the whole vehicle network has to stop while that happens. Also applies to school buses laden with young kids. Same principle. There is insufficient lane allowance for 3 heavy vehicles across. So that's about turning right towards Tauranga. Now, coming off the Kaimai's turning right into Belk Road is a nightmare. Most sensible residents don't do it. They go up to Redwood Lane, the next road, turn around and come back again. I have seen near misses there. The camber is against that turning traffic, and I've seen cars over the bank because they don't allow for that sloping camber when they're coming from that direction. So the way forward, I'll give you the quick history. In 2017, NZTA committed to safety enhancements at our intersection. The land was purchased by owners on each side to widen it. Somewhere around 800,000 was committed to the funding. 600, okay. A dispute arose with Regional Council at the time about extending the culvert under State Highway 29 by 1 metre. An argument developed about the water with NZTA. Phil Twyford, the then Minister of Transport, took the opportunity because there was arguments going on between Regional Council and NZTA to pull the funding. We understand that funding went towards Transmission Gully in Wellington. So the whole thing stopped, 2017. Then along comes the biggest chipboard factory in the country, Winston's, at the bottom of Belk Road. So we're all promised 3 short-term safety enhancements to cope with all that. One was closing the intersection of Belk Road with 29, a new set of traffic lights at Tauranga School, and a new set of traffic lights at Cambridge Road intersection with 29 to ease the total congestion. We were promised those 3 things called short-term fixes by NZTA at their open home. They had open home days down at the crossing in an empty premises there. They put out glossy newsletters, committed those 3 things to that, and sent out emails. Then in April this year, there was Western Bay Infrastructure Forum held, and Minister of Finance Robertson and the 2 Labour list MP ladies were in attendance. In the Sun Live article that covered that, with Mr. Robertson's mugshot in the middle of it, he tells us all those 3 short-term safety enhancements are now deferred to 2025. So in total, that's 8 years from 2017, and you can guarantee 2025 is going to be a stretch as well. So if our intersection was dangerous then, in 17, how come it's less dangerous in 2025? Why isn't it happening? Lives continue to be a risk. Thank you.
What he didn't say was that in 2017, it was Adam Francis who had already designed that Belk Road intersection, and so it was just taken from us, that money. And you asked the Mayor to support, not you, James, and he said, oh, well, it's going to be closed anyway. So you can see the frustration of living off a highway. Our next speaker is Miranda Campbell from Omanawa Road. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Margaret. Hello, everybody. I'm Miranda Campbell. I know a few faces here, but not many.
Into the mic.
Into the mic. Hello. Yes. I'm Miranda Campbell, and I live on Omanawa Road. I have done for the last 28 years. As you probably know, Omanawa Road has a central median strip, and and off a slip road getting off the state highways. So traffic from the east and west is catered for quite nicely in that degree. However, when leaving Omanawa Road, we have a serious issue with visibility of traffic coming from Hamilton. This was made very much worse about 15 years ago when they did an improvement on the contour of Omanawa Road intersection with the state highway. It was the so-called upgrade, and at the same time as the upgrade, they increased the verge on the Omanawa Road side of the state highway. The verge is now so vast that frequently huge trucks pull in for a rest, even though there's yellow lines, broken lines indicating, Alice, could you come up a moment, please? I think my daughter is going to have to take over. I've got outrageous stage fright. And she's much better at it than me.
I'm not going to do much better. Hello, everybody. I've also lived on Omanawa Road for most of my life. Where are we up to?
We're up to the heavy trucks.
So frequently large trucks pull in at the verge, even though there are broken yellow lines indicating no parking. When this happens, there is zero visibility of oncoming traffic, and I have had to leave my car in the middle of Omanawa Road, run up to the driver and ask him to either move or wave me across the state highway. Only last week, there was a 3-car pile-up at the junction caused by a driver pulling out of Omanawa Road straight into oncoming traffic. Either a case of attempted suicide or due to a lack of visibility. Amazingly, on this occasion, the people involved were shaken but not hurt. This week, a Downer Safe For You truck was parked in the verge, making it a difficult junction. Death trap. Downer, by the way, are the worst offenders for parking on the verge. The daily game of Russian roulette is becoming more intense for me. Visibility of oncoming traffic is a problem urgently needing addressing. Ultimately, though, the issue is the huge volume of traffic using the road, particularly heavy haulage, which is inevitably only going to increase, all on the road constructed over 100 years ago with minimal upgrades, deeming it unsuitable for its current usage. Thank you
very much.
Miranda ran the Falls Cafe for a number of years. There's nothing shy about her, and nothing shy.
Public speaking and me do not match.
Oh, right. But you can understand the yellow lines get put in, and then we tell the NZTA they're not working, but they don't have any other suggestion to actually improve the situation, and they don't listen. So, my next speaker is Graham Dwyer from Ruahihi Road, and everybody says, you're lucky, Graham, because you've got the right-hand turn and the left-hand turn, but you're saying there still is an issue.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to start off with a compliment, which is probably not the thing to do tonight, but we had a major shambles at the end of our road caused by rafting people, canoe people and truss power. They all combined to make our life hell. And our sight, vision sight, turning left at Ruahihi Road got down to zero. I'm talking about zero. You went out, you didn't know what was going to happen when you went out. It was really bad. Now, after a lot of talk with the Western Bay, Margaret called a meeting in the office, Western Bay, with all the affected people. And she stood in the doorway and said, nobody's leaving in this meeting until everything is resolved. And she would not move from the doorway. That's true, isn't it?
I don't know.
You were there. Anyhow, Western Bay bought a piece of land next to the power station and developed that with toilets, and that is the base for water sports down there, and from that period of time, some years, I have never seen one car on the highway, on the verge. They've always gone down there out of sight, and it's all thanks to you. Now, what we got at the end of the road at the moment, we've got 5 lanes. And one is the approach lane into our road, coming from Tauranga. That's fine. Then you've got a little lane, it's 15 metres long, it's about as long as this distance, and you're supposed to go into that lane legally. You're supposed to go into that lane and move from 0 to 100 kilometres, because that's where your friends are coming around the corner, and you can't do it. There's no way you can do it. So that 15 metre access way into the highway turning right, it needs to be about, I don't know, 80 metres or 100. There's no way you can move in that little period of 15 metres. Then I've done a lot of homework with the police and NZTA about what I'm talking about. Now, that is the legal way of doing things. The safe way, which I do, which is illegal, is I go out onto the shoulder. That's the 5th lane over. And I've done a survey on our road, and 50-50 do the right thing, and the other 50% do what I do. Now, I don't know what can be done. Our line sight coming up the Kaimai is the bare minimum. I'm not too sure what it is. It's 160 metres or something, but it's the bare legal minimum. And to make it longer, it's probably a bit of a major. So I'm not standing here criticising NZTA, they should do X, Y, Z. Things are pretty reasonable at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. And I must apologise, I forgot to welcome you, Ken Shirley, all right, and his wife, Jenny. So he's speaking shortly. So thank you, Graham. And yes, we worked with Adam Francis again on that intersection, and he did some good design work, and it worked to a degree. So, and I see you've got Margaret sitting behind you as well, Margaret Brazier. So the next speaker is Denise, and this is a combination, this lot, Denise and Nicola, and Julie. And when we did the ceiling for Kumi Road, these two women said, we can't get on and off Poripori Road. It is so dangerous. Girls, the floor is yours.
We don't need more time. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nicola and reside on Kumi Road off Poripori Road. You will all be familiar with Poripori Road. It boasts one of the bay's best known freshwater swimming spots, very popular with families and young people during summer, which often reduces Poripori Road down to one lane with cars fighting for every available parking space. If you haven't swum at the waterhole, you will have used our official detour route through Poripori that connects to State Highway 2. This is well used when the highway is closed to an accident or as an alternative route into town when the highway is congested, and let's face it, that's often. While we boast a beautiful swimming spot and through road to State Highway 2, we have no right-hand turn to safely negotiate our intersection. State Highway 29 is ranked among the nation's top 10 riskiest stretches of road, and I feel like I play Russian roulette every time I make a right-hand turn into Poripori Road. NZTA has been actively trying to shift the freight traffic that heads to our port from State Highway 2 to 29, which has been successful. I see what I call truck trains, truck after truck heading down the hill towards Poripori, while we wait in the middle of the road to turn, as logging trucks hurtle towards us from behind that must swerve onto the shoulder to pass. From a mother's point of view, teaching a 16-year-old how to negotiate this intersection is scary. Country kids tend to get their licence as soon as they are legally allowed. As there is no such thing as public transport or bike lanes, our teenagers, for them to get to sporting or work commitments. We do have school buses, however, that also sit in the middle of the road to turn into Poripori, with a busload of children that aren't seat belted in. Heaven forbid if one of these buses is ever involved in an accident at our dangerous intersection. I'll pass you over to Julie.
I'm a little bit shorter than you. Vertically challenged. Right. Hi, I'm Julie. I live in Tebet Road, that's just off Poripori. So I do travel quite frequently on State Highway 29. I've got kids, just like Nicola, so school run, sports run. I also work from home, so quite often I'm ducking out for appointments. So I'd be using that intersection at least 4 or 5 times a day. And yet, even though I'm experienced on that intersection, it doesn't make it any easier. It's great when you realise, as you turn on your indicator, that there's a local behind you. You can tell because they tend to back off. But that's really the case. Normally it's someone hurrying up behind you, and as Nicola said, you feel like a sandwich, the meat in the sandwich, with trucks on both sides, making your car rattle. Now, I did approach NZTA 2 years ago because I was so concerned about how dangerous this intersection was. I got extremely excited and I was optimistic when Adam, the rep from NZTA, agreed to meet Bruce, my husband, and myself on site. We turned up armed with a potential temporary solution, only to be told there's no money in the pot to do anything. Now, I just heard today that I believe there's about 279 million in the roading pool from the budget. I don't know, you guys probably know more than me about that, but let's hope they can spare a little bit for the Kaimai roads. After lots of emails backwards and forward, I felt a bit fobbed off, to be honest, and I know you really love Adam.
Yes, I do.
And I have respect for Adam, but I've got to say I've found it extremely frustrating. So I suggested that perhaps there was a way for me to fundraise. I like fundraising. Maybe I could fundraise to get our roads right. Because all we were talking about, sorry, take this off for a sec, was to get some lines changed and a big sign put up to say, slow down, right turning traffic. And he said, well, you'll need about 15,000 to paint some lines. So I was pretty annoyed, for lack of a better word that I'm allowed to use tonight, that these lines had just recently been repainted to the same damn spot. You know, sorry, just lost my spot. Now, this would have been an absolutely great opportunity to have made some changes. This is not an intersection when you can pull over to the left and wait and safely duck across. There's no visibility and the traffic is just going too fast. And as you know, there's always plenty of roadworks happening up the hill, and you'll see in one of the pictures there, road cones, they tend to block the shoulder. So that takes us down to one lane to get across to Poripori. It's very dangerous. I've even had to stop and help a mother who was hit, and her photo of the car, you can see the pram coming out of the boot in that folder you've got. She had 2 little babies with her, and I got there just as it had happened. She'd been shunted from the back trying to turn right into Poripori, and we're so lucky it wasn't a fatality as a young fella came down the hill, had to go to the wrong side of the road to avoid her. So my question is, and I'm so disappointed NZTA is not here, but what is it going to take? Do we have to wait for another death on our roads before something happens here?
Hello, I'm Denise Kilgour and I'm from Kumi Road, neighbour of Nicholas. Now I'm taking a different tack. I'm coming with short-term solutions. First of all, the vegetation around the bridge on the left-hand side heading up the Kaimais, you cannot see what is coming down the Kaimais until you're virtually on the bridge. And having to turn right just over the bridge, it's a real problem. The suggestion is to widen each side of State Highway 29 at Poripori Road intersection, creating another left lane, enabling room for a safe right turning bay into Poripori Road, and moving the gap in the yellow no passing lines slightly up the Kaimais for more room, which would certainly be beneficial to our school buses. And another, installing signage, warnings of turning traffic, including speed restrictions prior to each end of the bridge. If we're not already done, we need an analysis of the types of vehicles on the highway and what time of day. It may well be beneficial if heavy transport could travel at night or off-peak times. And the longer-term solution could be creating a double rail line from Mount Maunganui to Hamilton to connect with the already established Turapa to Auckland line, thus reducing some of the traffic on State Highway 29. Of course, the ultimate is another tunnel, road rail tunnel somewhere. And just to sum up, traffic chaos on State Highway 29 severely impedes the productivity and economic growth of our beautiful region. Safety should be a priority for all New Zealanders using State Highway 29, and it is urgently needed. Thank you.
Well done, thank you, ladies. I just want to say NZTA is not here, but we will write up and I will go and see David Spears and hand him personally the results of this meeting tonight and instruct him that he is only following government orders, and if government won't supply the money, Simeon, if government won't supply the money, they can't do anything. And so, for example, for Adam Francis as the safety engineer, he can only work with the money that he's got. That's his great problem. And so it's our great frustration. So living in the hills, the reason I stood for Western Bay of Plenty was because I thought the hill people were being walked over. We're getting far more articulate than we ever used to be, and so I think we're going quite well. But we won't let them away with it. We will make sure that the MPs all know what has happened here tonight as well, including the two leaders.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Adam, I did actually personally invite Adam to come as well because you were having trouble, and he does send his apologies.
I apologised for him as we began. So the next speaker is, I've got Margaret Murray there. Well, I'll tell you a little story. No, Ngāmuahini Road. Ngāmuahini Road. Elaine Garnett, my lovely neighbour, is here. She rang me one day and said, "There's no room for a right-hand turn into Ngāmuahini, Margaret. I rang Adam Francis, he picked me up, we went up, he had a stick on his wheels and he measured around and said, yes, there is room. And so Roger and Elaine were on that corner, and so coming towards us was a car creeping down the road. She had a flat tyre, a flat bald tyre, I might add, and Roger and Adam got down on their hands and knees and changed the tyre for her, and she went happily on her way into town. So at Ngā Moahine School Camp, and their celebration just recently, Jerry Hart was saying what a great thing it was to have had that right-hand turn done into Ngā Moahine, because people going up to the school camp were ever so grateful that they had that safety spot to rest in to make the right-hand turn. It's quite simple to do, and on Poripori Road, the land to the left as you're coming up belongs to the NZTA, so they've got room. Then the next speaker is, where am I? Oh, wrong. I've got Alan Costa from Thorne Road. And remember, his ute can shift blocks of concrete.
Wow, there's a lot of people here. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Alan Costa and I'm representing the residents that travel in and out of the unsafe Thorne Road entrance to State Highway 29. The road design for driving in and out of Thorne Road is an absolute disgrace. Going south on State Highway 29, entering into Thorne Road, the width of the pullover bay on the left side is only 2 metres wide. We then have to cross 3 lanes with great big juggernauts bearing down on us, commonly travelling in excess of 100 kilometres an hour. We have been told it is illegal to use the centre lane to turn right into Thorne Road following a big accident with someone exactly doing that. There are too numerous to count the number of near misses we have experienced at our road entrance. The deceleration lane travelling north on State Highway 29 turning into Thorne Road is only 2 metres wide as well to the curb and is dangerous. The sight distance to turning out of Thorne Road looking to the right in McLaren's Falls direction is only 110 metres because Transit New Zealand raised up the State Highway at McLaren's Falls entrance and we are now unable to see past it. I measured that today. It was very scary too, I might add, with the trucks thundering past. I timed things today at that the school bus has only 7 seconds to pull out and get up to full speed to avoid a truck crashing into it. We would like to ask Transit New Zealand why they have completely blocked our 3 metre wide acceleration lane turning out of Thorne Road. It leads into a bus bay, but it was perfectly adequate. It's now blocked. There are heavy loaded trucks and trailer units turning in and out of Thorne Road onto the State Highway, posing a real risk of a crash because the only way they can turn into Thorne Road is to do it from the centre lane of the State Highway, and turning out of Thorne Road they have to cross 3 lanes if they're heading in the southerly direction. Recently I spoke to some regional council engineers looking at sealing Thorne Road. They said to me they were very afraid when they turned into Thorne Road and told me a safe entrance into Thorne Road is a lot more important than actually tar sealing it. I would like to request, Madam Chairperson, that the Transit New Zealand authorities be put on notice as to the urgent need of a turning lane in the centre of State Highway 29 into Thorne Road for vehicles travelling in a south direction, and that we hold them to account for the very likelihood of a real accident with a loaded truck and the school bus and dead kids all over the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan, and you remind us that we should put some recommendations forward at the end of the meeting. The next speaker is there a school rep here tonight? The principal said she would try to get someone to come. And I must add, is there a representative from the port company? He was thinking of coming too. So the next speaker is the very experienced Julie Mitson.
Hi, I'm Julie. I live up Soldiers Road. I must apologise for the flyer that I sent out to Soldiers Road people. It had, do you feel safe entering an existing State Highway 29? It was obviously just printed off what I was thinking. With the visibility on the corner of the sight bench when you're heading over the Kaimais, when you're looking that way, the very corner is never mowed so that you can't see, you would be able to see a lot further than you can, and you've got the passing lanes coming down the Kaimai that are ending just out of sight, which doubles the traffic into a short space of time there. They mow the sight bench, but they don't mow the corner. And then vehicles turning into Soldiers Road from Tauranga are often taken, this is coming from Tauranga, are often overtaken on the double yellow lines. And this becomes a real threat if vehicles are exiting Soldiers Road towards Tauranga while vehicles are turning in. Someone's going to get T-boned. When you're coming down the Kaimais from the Matamata side, the guardrail is too long and the uneven edge on the seal on the left-hand side of the lane when entering Soldiers Road from Matamata direction makes pulling left and letting following vehicles past unsafe. If the guardrail was shortened or angled out, it would just leave a little bit more room there. And coming from the same direction, there's not enough room for overtaking vehicles when waiting on the double yellows at the right of the lane. I had a very frightening experience there a few months ago. I was sitting in the middle of the road, there was only one vehicle coming behind me, and I was expecting them to pull in behind me and wait for me to turn in, and they passed me on the right over the double yellow lines in between traffic coming from Tauranga side. And we had some two police officers living up Soldiers Road. They worked in the Waikato, and one of them was too scared to pull right into the middle of the road in a marked police car. They pulled to the left. That's how unsafe they thought it was. And the primary school bus in the mornings, it leaves the school here and it goes up and picks up the Soldiers Road children and then carries on up the Kaimais, takes them from Joyride all the way up the Kaimais, because they think that is safer than trying to turn into Soldiers Road on their way back to school. I suppose whatever works for them, and I don't think reducing the speed, the answer is probably going to come out, we'll just reduce the speed limit from the top of the Kaimais to Tauranga. But although that might make for lower impact crashes, it's going to dramatically increase the time it takes for us to get to exit the side roads, because it's hard enough sitting there now for 5 minutes at a time to exit onto the highway at the moment. So I don't know what the answers are, but those are the problems that I see. So that was it. Don't need to ring the bell.
Thank you, Julie. And I don't know if any of you have noticed what Soldiers Road is like, but it's really quite scary, and to think that you have to do that every day. And there's all that productive land up in the hills, so it's tragic that...
Well, it was supposed to be realigned, but then that was many years ago, and then they took the funding was there, and then they took it for the Christchurch earthquake, so nothing's been mentioned since.
That's figures. Right. And then I come to Debbie Marshall, and Debbie lives at the old Kaimai Road, right at the top. She thought a tin of paint, she could fix it.
Hi everyone, I'm Debbie Marshall. I've been entering and exiting these side roads all my life, and Old Kaimai Road in particular for the last 40 years. For those that aren't familiar with our road, we are situated on the right-hand side of State Highway 29 when you're heading towards Hamilton. We are basically at the top of the steepest climb on this side of the hill. We aren't a quiet little road anymore. In fact, we now have 40 odd households, all with multiple drivers living in them. We also have a lodge, the Henderson tram, which is frequented by trampers and hunters, and various businesses entering and exiting from the highway. So we don't only have locals who are aware of our situation, but our fair share of naive public entering our road too. Our major issue is we have to sit smack in the middle of a fast passing lane to exit the highway into our road. We have no issues coming from the Hamilton direction as we have a marked slip-in lane here, but from the Tauranga direction to home is so dangerous it's a bloody nightmare. And unfortunately 90% of our traffic is coming from this direction. Our road exits on a slight bend, so you have very limited vision as to what's coming down the hill until you are nearly at the point of pulling in, especially if trucks are blocking your view. You are always hoping to be lucky and have a gap, but if not, some very quick thinking has to happen at this point, as there can be 2 full lanes of traffic coming up from behind you. Our most dangerous encounters are when we have a truck in the left-hand lane and accelerating vehicles coming up the hill quickly pull out to pass them, right at the point where you are sitting stopped in the middle of the passing lane. It's not something they're expecting to see this far out of town, a vehicle sitting in the middle of a state highway passing lane. This is a terrifying experience, listening to screeching brakes and big trucks honking their horns. There have been some unbelievable near misses here. Often I've been forced to put pedal to the metal and try and slip into the neighbour's driveway, which involves coming back across the left-hand lane of traffic very quickly in a short space of time. If you miss this driveway, which my husband describes as a prick of a thing to get into, you end up at Hanger Road, which adds another 10 k's to your journey home. No matter what strategy you use coming up the hill, trying to pick your path, giving plenty of indication, braking, some even using their hazard lights, there is simply just too much traffic these days to be a sitting duck in the middle of a passing lane. We are very concerned parents of teenagers with new licences, as it is a challenging enough situation for experienced drivers. The cars they can afford aren't exactly great if you were to be rear-ended, so I particularly feel for these parents and the young drivers. It was bad enough when my kids were teenagers trying to turn and driving their little economical manual cars a good 10 years ago, and it's only got worse. We are not asking for the speed limit to be lowered, as we have had the flashing speed signs which change according to the weather for a few years now, and they make no difference to our issue. We do see the solution as not being too difficult. Since the government doesn't seem to have any money, our particular road doesn't actually require much money to make a massive improvement. In fact, it's probably cheaper than paying for a funeral. I'm sure with a bit of paint, possibly the stuff Waka Kotahi are rewriting our road signs with, we could shorten up the existing passing lane to give us a pull-in lane. This current passing lane starts at Boulder Bridge just after Māori Flat and ends about 200 metres past our road, so it is a long one. I did a rough measure the other day and it's 2.2 k's to our intersection. If we shortened it to about 1.6 or 1.7 k's, we can give us a safe pull-in lane and also our friends in Valley View Road, somewhere to go when coming down the Kaimais into their road. They currently have nowhere to go at all. They have to sit smack in the middle of the single downhill lane, which is no shoulder, and they cross the 2 upcoming lanes of traffic into their road. So that would be fixing 2 of our roads with not a lot of expense and one simple paint job. Whilst passing lanes are great with all the trucks we have on our highway, there will still be room left after our safe pull-in lane to have a few hundred metres of more passing opportunities. Then it's not actually that far to the next passing lane, which pretty much goes right to the top from the Tuakopai Bridge. I think we would all prefer to live with one shortened passing lane rather than the extremely dangerous situation we are all putting up with at the moment, which is going to end with someone losing their life or seriously injured trying to enter our road. If we were filling out near-hit forms like we do for our own personal businesses and looked at the stats, alarm bells would be going off and you would be doing something about it pronto before you end up with a tragedy and WorkSafe on your case. Now you've all witnessed how crap I am at public speaking, you will realise I'm not ready to do a funeral speech for any of my family, neighbours or friends. So let's hope someone here has got some clout to get this sorted sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. You said it all. And make sure that we have your notes before you go, if you wouldn't mind. Now we've come to the other speakers tonight, and I'm glad you all thanked the speakers so far, because this is the first time they've actually been held to account to actually speak to anybody in the public arena to do with their roads. So I'm really quite proud of all of you, and I thank you very much indeed, and I'd like everybody to show their appreciation. Our next speaker is someone who really needs little introduction. When he first stood for Labour in Nelson, he was told he needed to look at the blue dots because that's what National was organising. And he really found quite a few, until he discovered later that it was for homogenised milk, and so he got it a bit wrong. But he hasn't got much wrong since then, and there is nobody in this region who knows more about heavy transport and financing, and we're just so grateful that he's on the Regional Council and he's the Deputy Chairman of the Transport Committee. I'm sure some of the councillors must feel sorry for themselves when you speak, Ken, because you're so good. So please come.
Thank you, Margaret. Good evening, everyone. That's a rather extravagant introduction, I might say. And can I recognise the members of Parliament here, and the Mayor and the councillors from Western Bay District Council. I'm a first-term regional councillor, along with Jane Nees. We both are the representatives for the Western Bay part of the Regional Council. Having just heard those harrowing stories from the locals, you can't help but think, wow, we've got a problem here. And it's a daily life for you folks. You're dancing with life and death virtually every time you venture out, and it's really just not acceptable, is it? So we need to find solutions. The Western Bay region or sub-region is, as we all know, the fastest growing region in the country. The Port of Tauranga, and we haven't got a port representatives here, but we all know it is the key port, the driver of the New Zealand economy. A huge proportion of our meat, dairy, horticulture and forestry all goes out through the ports of Tauranga, along with a significant proportion of imports. So State Highway 29 has to be a road of national significance. It has to be a key arterial route. And yes, we need remedial measures like finding little lanes here and little parking things, but we've got to think bigger than that long term. Yes, we must, we need to find those solutions now that can be done to ameliorate some of the immediate problems, but longer term we've got to think much bigger than that. And I'd like to spend some time just on where I think we're at in that big picture sense, because prior to retiring 4 years ago and moving to Omanawa, I had 10 years as CEO of the Road Transport Forum, which was the key body for New Zealand's freight and logistics, and we interfaced daily with NZTA on the roading network, sort of countrywide. And I'd have to say I'm very dismayed at where we're currently at. We know money's tight, but we also waste so much money, and that's the frustrating thing. It does come down to priorities. And infrastructure and connectivity, that's what drives the economy. That's what creates wealth. That's what creates jobs. It actually pays for itself. And unfortunately, we sort of lost our way a bit. A few years back, we had the introduction of the roads of national significance Stephen Joyce was the Minister of Transport at the time, and he had a real vision, recognising the importance of connectivity, the importance of having integrated roading networks for freight, for people, getting to businesses, for tradies. That's what makes the economy really hum. And under those roads of national significance, it was really a catch-up. Because in New Zealand, when you look at the OECD, we were in the lowest 10% quartile, not quartile, 10% at the bottom of the OECD for investment in roading infrastructure. It's something we had neglected really from about the 1930s, and we were way behind the 8 ball. So the concept there, driven by government of the time, was a catch-up program, and we had things like the whole Waikato Expressway system rolled from Puhoi really to Cambridge now. And you look at that road, the way it works, there's no congestion, it's much safer, the fatalities have gone down. We look at the Puhoi to Wellsford, the Mackay's Peka Peka, Transmission Gully, the Eastern Bypass Bay of Plenty here in our region. What a huge advantage that was. Imagine if all that transport was still going through Te Puke and the problems we would have. Significant programs also in Christchurch and Nelson. Perhaps I should say at this point, the views I'm expressing tonight are my personal views. They're not necessarily the views of the Regional Council or the Regional Transport Committee, which I'm the co-chair of, but they are my personal views based on sort of my experience over sort of more recent years. So what happened, of course, with the roads projects, the opposition parties of the days were all campaigning against them, and we should just think back. The Labour Party and the Greens, they all campaigned vigorously against Transmission Gully, which is a 27-kilometre stretch. They campaigned vigorously against the Puhoi to Wellsford. Remember all those election campaigns, they labelled it the holiday highway, trying to belittle it and saying that they would take away the money. It wasn't the holiday highway, it was the connectivity to Northland. It's what makes the Northland economy integrated with the rest of the country. So that was all pretty frustrating at the time. So we were making pretty good progress, and the whole National Land Transport Fund, which really is the road taxes, the road users' taxes, was in a hypothecated fund. We had vision, we had programs. It was long term and it was sustained. And the real issue was to build up an infrastructure, to build up the capacity to do the job is so important. But we had that. We had teams of contractors, trained people, the workers, all there. They knew they had ongoing work. They all had programs. And all of a sudden, with the change of government in 2017, they pulled the rug. The RONS projects were cancelled overnight. And unfortunately, a whole change of focus came to NZTA. I don't beat up on NZTA. There's very good people in there, highly competent, and many within the NZTA are equally frustrated. But being public servants, they cannot speak out. They are bound to work with the government of the day and do the best they can. And that's the climate that they work in, and it's important that is how it is, actually. So we shouldn't beat up on NZTA. There's some very good people there who are probably more frustrated than me, actually, in terms of where we're at now in terms of our roading infrastructure to service our communities countrywide. So with that change of government, the rug was pulled. And it virtually just stopped overnight. And I'd have to say there was a huge anti-roading sentiment within the opposition parties at the time who are now in government. We mentioned, the belittling the holiday, we're calling it the holiday highway, campaigning against Transmission Gully in 2 or 3 general elections. And there's brigades in there of more extreme who are fiercely anti-car, anti-truck, anti-road, anti-petrol, anti-diesel, and they believe that with cycling, public transport, more walking and rail will solve our nation's infrastructural problems. Well, the hard reality is that over 90% of our freight by volume is conveyed by truck. I could talk all night about why that is. Rail's important, but it's a very small proportion of the total freight task on a tonnage basis. And it comes down to flexibility, point-to-point, just-in-time economics, and rail has certain inherent inflexibilities that makes it very hard to compete. And that's a pattern that you see all around the world. Along with sort of cycling, public transport and rail, of course, there's also a huge shift in emphasis to safety. Now, no one can be against road safety, but you have to keep it in proportion. And what we've got now is, the sort of the road to zero. Julianne Genter, current MP who was at one stage the Associate Transport Minister, she actually proposed that all rural roads should have a maximum speed of 80 kilometres an hour, and in all urban areas the maximum speed should be 30 kilometres an hour. Can you imagine that? That's what the thinking that is behind some of where we are today. So it's really a lost impetus, a lost momentum, and particularly it's cost us billions of dollars, losing that teams of contractors and employees, which takes years to build up and put together. Once you break a program like that, you start from scratch again. The price goes through the roof. And that's half the reason why there's no money to do the work, because we've all done it with churn and another round of consultants, and on it goes, on and on and on, just endless churn. So there's two severe areas of congestion as I see it in our region, and one is certainly Highway 29, and I don't need to talk to your folks about that. It's a serious problem. And the other key one at the moment is the Highway 2 out to, or at least to Omanawa. And yes, the second tier of the road, Ron's projects was actually the Takitumu North Link Road, stage 1 and 2. And fortunately, number 1 survived, and that's under construction now. That will make a huge difference. That's good. But the current government actually pulled the plug on stage 2, and Michael Wood, the Minister of Transport, actually boasted and stated at the time that he was funding the harbour cycle bridge out of money taken from stage 2 of the Takitumu North project. And of course they spent over $15 million on that bridge across the harbour for cycles, and then now the plug's been pulled on that. So that was just money down the drain. And the other day, I live in Omanawa, Jenny and I, and it took me an hour and a half to get from Omanawa into my meeting, which I was late to, in Tauranga. So these are the problems that we've got, and they are solvable. But congestion, in my view, is the number one problem. And I think what we need is to recognise that State Highway 29, it's a road of national significance, it's a feeder to the port, it's the connectivity between the Golden Triangle, Auckland, Hamilton, Tauranga. It's crucial that we think in a big sense, and as we know, there's plans on the drawing board to have virtually an expressway there up through to the lower Kaimais with safe exits and entries and separation at grade where required. That's the longer term picture that we must try and get government back on track with. But in the meanwhile, we certainly need to put a lot more effort into these remedial measures that you have all identified and Margaret's been backing away so hard at. So thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening, and happy to answer any questions later on. Thank you.
Told you he was good. Now I'd like to ask Simeon Brown to come and speak, please. And Tom Rutherford and Sam Uffendale, if you'd come and sit up the front as well.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Can I just start by saying what a privilege it is to have been invited by Margaret to come as the National Party Transport spokesperson to speak here tonight, along with my colleagues Sam Uffendale, who's the Member of Parliament for Tauranga, and Tom Rutherford has just been selected as the new candidate here in Bay of Plenty. And so it's great to be here together to listen to the concerns of the community here on State Highway 29. And I have taken copious notes because I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunity to hear the stories of people who use this road on a day-to-day basis, and quite frankly to hear what you're dealing with. If you were living in a city, you would have a solution pretty quickly, and I feel that you're being ignored because you live in a rural community, and I don't think that's acceptable. So thank you for the opportunity to be able to hear. Now, Ken Shirley just stole my speech. So everything that Ken said, I 100% agree with. What has happened in the last 6 years when it comes to roading investment is, I think, a national shame. We have gutted the state highway budget. We're now spending less than half of the money you pay in petrol taxes actually back into building and maintaining the roading network. Now, you pay that money to build a safe, resilient and efficient network. That's why you pay your road taxes if you drive a diesel vehicle. That's why you pay fuel excise when you fill up with a petrol car. That is what your money should be going towards. And when Labor took the money away from our state highway budgets, it meant that projects which were, and I'll give an example, Otaki to north of Levin, a project of national significance, which when we left government was going to cost $750 million, it's now going to cost $2 billion to build. And so that gives you a sense of the scale that we now face in order to turn the ship around, if we win this election, to get the focus back onto roading and roading improvements. And I can assure you that as we are developing our policies when it comes to transport, the number one principle of transport funding will be that your road taxes go back into building and maintaining the roading network, not into $30 billion light rail projects in Auckland which have gone nowhere, not into $70 million a kilometre cycle lanes, because that's what your money's going towards, but back into building and maintaining the roading network. And critically important to that is safety, resilience, and efficiency of that network. And so, look, I can assure you that we have listened here tonight to your concerns. The issues here in the Bay of Plenty are significantly important. Obviously, State Highway 2 is critically important. We've already committed to finishing that all the way to Omakaroa, because that needs to happen. It should be being done at the same time. It's just frankly appalling that they're just doing half the road and then they're only going to give you half the space. They're going to give half of it to a bus lane. It's just unacceptable. The next stage is we need to find a solution to the Tauranga extension and expressway, and at the same time we need to invest in safety improvements, critical safety improvements along this part of the network as well. Now, Road to Zero, the whole philosophy behind it is it meant to be about reducing road deaths. What we're actually getting from it is $60 million a year in road advertising. So when you see those TV adverts, $60 million that's going into that. We're seeing speed bumps everywhere. I call it the epidemic of speed bumps. There's enough money to put speed bumps everywhere. There's not enough money to fill the potholes and actually make sure our roads are safe. And speed limit reductions. Now, there'll be a range of views around whether some areas should have temporary slower speed limits, and those we're open to that conversation. But blanket speed limit reductions is not the solution. So we've got to get back to basics with road transport. And as Ken rightly put it, there are good people at NZTA who know how to do this and who need a mandate from government to be able to get on and do it. And that's what we want to do. Another thing we're going to need to do is we actually need to give NZTA a longer term investment framework. At the moment, they invest in 3 yearly cycles. And so when you talk about the money was pulled because of Christchurch, that was because they needed money to make it work within a 3 yearly cycle. We need to give them a longer term mandate so that they can make much more sensible and efficient decisions over a longer period of time. Currently, they can't do that. And so we need to empower this organisation to be delivering for you, delivering for road transport, and a very clear mandate, and taking away all of the other things which are distracting them. That's our commitment here tonight, and we'll be announcing further policies around that closer to the election, and in particular here for the Bay of Plenty as well. But thank you once again for the opportunity to be here and to listen and be part of this meeting. Thank you very much.
of the commissioners at Tauranga City said when I was complaining about the fact that the cycleway that they have built on Totara Street doesn't have any cyclists on it, and when we go on it 3 times a week. And so I got this, Don Thwaite said to me at council one morning, Margaret, you were mentioned in dispatches and yesterday at TCC. And I said, what have I done? And he said, the cycleway survey that they had done was so successful, Stephen Selwood said, you should show that to Councillor Benge, hate being called that, Councillor Benge, because she's so negative about the cycleway. So I replied to Mr. Selwood and I said my partner Don Brash and I got this beautiful reply from him. And sometimes, girls, you have to use our men as well just to sort of prop up the argument, which I did with Don. He then came back to me and agreed that Totara Street should have an extra lane, but that was in fact the responsibility of the Land Transport, to which I replied, it's a local road, you're responsible, and Mark Kens wanted it to be a state highway, that extra lane, but in reality, it's a local road. So he then came back to me about congestion charging. And one of the things I'd recommend you don't do is when you go to bed tonight, at night with your partner, you don't get into a debate about congestion charging. Because I said, give us a decent road, then I might talk about congestion charging. In the meantime, we are so, as you can see, Simeon, we're so neglected here and we need some action. And that road that goes from the centre of Auckland out to the airport, National has got to say, stop it, because it will cost billions and billions. Light rail and... Sorry? Light rail, well, whatever it is. It will cost billions and billions and it's got to stop.
We're not doing it. We're not doing it.
Is the government not doing it? And you're saying that, well, sometimes they get a bit weak around the knees, Simeon. So it's really important that you keep the pressure on. Now, I've said enough, and I think you'll agree that we've had some very fine speakers here tonight, and I'm so proud of these people, and I think if we had to, we'd hire a bus and go and protest outside Parliament. That might be our last alternative. So it's question time. Has anyone any questions for any of the speakers? Murray. Murray Granger, Kaimai Ward Councillor.
Things kicking off. Simeon, National going to bring in road usage charges for electric vehicles.
That's a good question, and the answer is the exemption ends next year. So it ends on July the 1st, 2024. In our view, all vehicles should be paying a road user charge, because if you use the road, you just pay for the road, and so that's the principle. And actually, there's a whole piece of transport funding reform that is required, because it's not just electric vehicles, but if you drive a hybrid or if you drive a more fuel efficient petrol vehicle, excise is no longer an efficient mechanism to measure road use. Road user charges, you pay per kilometre. And so ultimately all vehicles need to move to a road user charge base, so that people are paying for how much they use the road, not how much fuel or whether they're using fuel or not.
Sorry?
Yeah, well, congestion charging, so there's a discussion going on at the moment. Michael Wood is putting forward a proposal around congestion charging to enable councils to be able to put in place congestion charging areas. We are looking at, in principle, it is a method which can be used to price in order to get behaviours and create a more efficient network, right? So there is in theory, there's a efficiency which comes from that. The challenge, and I think Margaret made it very clear, is what's the benefit, and then what is the revenue used for? And so we're open to a discussion which looks at road pricing and how that can be used efficiently to get better outcomes. but we need to make sure that it's actually going back into the roads, not just necessarily being used to siphon money off for further pet projects. So look, in theory, it's in principle an idea which works overseas to get better outcomes and to ease congestion, but the devil's in the detail on that particular issue.
Any further questions?
Yeah, I've got a couple of trivial pursuit ones for you, Simeon. How many toll roads have we got in New Zealand?
You've got 2 here in the Bay of Plenty, and you've got 1 in Auckland.
And how much did the Waikato Expressway cost?
Oh, I think if you added all the particular projects up together, I think it was around $2 billion.
So how come that's not a toll road?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, the reality is, I mean, tolls are about should be used to bring projects forward. That's been the argument. That's been the argument here, is that you get infrastructure brought forward. The Hamilton bypass is an example where a toll could have been considered. Transmission gully is another example. And I think you've got to look at new revenue sources as part of an overall pricing approach to how you price transport appropriately. But the key thing is, then again, what is the revenues being used for? And it has to be about making sure we're investing back into a more resilient, safe and efficient network. That's what's critically important to that as well.
I guess my questions are really just a pointed
I know what you're saying.
example of why we've got more toll roads than the rest of the country put together.
Yes, look,
why can't we get rid of them?
I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, the point I'd make is we need funding to invest in infrastructure. There's always going to have to be someone who pays, and ultimately, if we want to make the investments that are required, we have to find a range of ways to raise those revenues to be able to deliver it.
Right. What the questioner was not telling you was that we all voted that the Eastern Arterial would go ahead of time if it was tolled, and we all agreed, the great majority of us agreed to that. But the thing we've got now is that we're so far behind the rest of the country that catching up will be your major challenge.
That is correct.
Yes, and I hope that Sam Uffindale and Tom Rutherford have learnt tonight that listening and fighting for people's rights is the job that you've got. And just as we in local government, that's our job as well. And so keeping the pressure on central government, we'll come in a bus if we have to. Just let us know and we'll be there to protest with you. Forget about Auckland, it gets too much attention. And I have to say that I was told that the Transport Agency don't take congestion into account when they're planning their roads.
Well, that's a very good point. So as Ken was outlining, so we have a National Land Transport Fund, which is the money that you pay for on your road user charges and petrol taxes. The government then sets the direction around how that is spent through the government policy statement. And it sets high-level priorities around what that money should be going towards. And then it allocates that money towards activity classes, and it chooses how much should be going into different activity classes. Now, in the government policy statement that we currently have, they don't take into account a thing called travel time savings. Now, any project which is using your money should be about making sure that you're spending less time travelling, because ultimately we don't get on the roads just to spend our time on the roads. We get on the roads because we want to go somewhere, we want to do something, we want to be home, we want to be at work, we want to use our time productively. Your time is no longer a factor in the decisions that are being made in Wellington, because it's the government policy statement doesn't require that to be considered. Now that, in my opinion, is completely ideologically driven and unacceptable, because your time matters. We want a more efficient network because that drives economic productivity and a whole range of other good outcomes. And so, as I say, the 3 outcomes that we need: efficiency, safety and resilience, so that we have a network which works for everybody, and those 3 things need to work together to get the best outcomes out of any particular piece of infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Miranda, you've got a question.
I've got a question. It's probably taking it right back down to grassroots, but can you tell me why it is that NZTA keeps using substandard materials when they're resurfacing the road?
Yes.
Can you all hear that question?
I can repeat the question. So the question is, why does NZTA use substandard material when resurfacing the road? And it all comes down to how much funding is available. And so they, as I said, the government sets the policy statement. They then allocate the money to different activity classes. And the reality is road maintenance costs have increased by 50% in the last 5 years. Significant portion of that, by the way, because of traffic management rules and regulation. And if you're on a council, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about around traffic management.
Drive past all the cones on stage.
Correct. So the reality is it's about how much money is allocated towards that, and then it's around the time frame around those decisions. So if NZTA has for too long, and this is not just a Labour issue, but it's a national issue, it's been an issue for too long, has been taking a short-term approach to the standard that we build our roads to. They're not funded to be able to take a longer term view. They've got to make a 3-yearly investment cycles, as I said. They're not able to take that longer term view, and so they invest in a lower quality build of our roads, which ultimately means more maintenance and more cost in the long term. And so our view is they should be able to take a longer term view so that we can get better decision making, which takes into account the full cost over a longer period. How does that change? Well, it's the legislation needs to change. The legislation, Land Transport Management Act, only mandates NZTA to make 3-yearly decisions. So the legislation will need updating to address that issue.
Denise.
Just one comment. Taranaki District Council has been doing research into recycled milk bottles into roading.
Yes.
And are having huge success.
Yes.
It is far superior to what is currently being used and about the same price.
Yeah, so the question is, Taranaki District Council's investing in recycling milk bottles to use into the roading network. Apparently it's same price, much better, superior quality. Reality is, NZTA, they are I'm not a roading engineer, but they need to be able to make those decisions to get the best quality. And if it's recycled bottles to make our roads safer and better and last longer and do all those things.
It's killing 2 birds.
Well, that's right. You can drive on those bottles instead of throwing them in the tip. But that's very good.
I suppose I've got a question for Sam here and for Tom. What are you going to do about the Cambridge Road 29 conglomeration we've got at that intersection when, as Lee says, it'll be 2025 before they actually start any work on it? What are we going to do in the meantime? Just a question for you.
Leave this one for me, Tom. That's good. I think on that one, we need to improve the safety around it. There's probably a longer term thing as well that we need to consider, and that is what State Highway 29 looks like going forward. And there has been quite a push there for a dedicated highway, grade separated, that runs alongside 29 as it currently is. That would allow that road to be turned into a local road, and a lot of that traffic, pretty much all of that freight coming off, would be on that new separate State Highway 29 running down the Kaimais and straight into Tauranga and into the port. So that's something that we know a lot of people, we know Priority 1, we know the councils, Western Bay, the MPs we're all very keen on, but we also have funding issues as well. But we are pushing that very hard at the moment with our infrastructure and transport spokespeople, and we hope to get a fairly positive outcome on that, because there are some significant safety and housing and efficiency benefits to be had by that. So that is what we are aiming towards as a long-term solution.
What do we do in the meantime, Sam?
But then in the meantime, there are
10 years away.
There are safety.
Lovely video of it all. But
yeah, it is a very nice video.
Why can't we just get the traffic lights at that intersection for a start?
Well, I can push for those traffic lights if that's what we want, and if we think that's going to make the difference, then we can push for it. And I can tell you what, putting in traffic lights would be a hell of a lot cheaper and a hell of a lot easier than a lot of these other projects, the Road to Zero, the $30,000 on big red zeros that Michael Wood's throwing out around the country. There would be a lot more sensible. So I'll take that to Simeon and we'll push for that. But it's a very good thing. And that's what's wonderful about being here, is that we hear from councils and economic development agencies about all of these big projects that they want. But for everyone here in this room and everyone who lives up and down the Kaimais, there are lots of small incremental gains that we could make that would be cost effective and make a huge difference to all of your lives. And when I hear some of the stories tonight about you've got young children, teenagers, mate, if that was me, I drive up here a bit and I see those roads and I look at them on the maps, and I've got young kids, and if they're going to grow up one day, and if they were having to be driving in and out of those roads, then I wouldn't sleep too peacefully. So we want to make a difference, and it's fantastic to be here and to be able to hear all of your concerns, and we can take those away and work to address them.
Thank you, Sam. And of course you didn't know I'm not that keen on cycleways. And there's so much money being spent on it, and every time I drive to Auckland, Simeon, you pass some lovely new roading works and a great big cycleway with nobody on it. Nobody walking, nobody cycling. Wayne, short question.
Ken Shirley bike for Christmas, Margaret.
Well, we're putting the paper down to coming up the road there. I wonder if maybe you could do some paint work out front here and make us work out here safe for cars getting in and out of this. If we have a situation where we've got overtaking lanes, we're right outside the primary school. I know we're talking to locals and bus drivers and all that sort of stuff. So every day I'm trying to get in and out. The extent that many people go in here, turn left, and then take Margaret's right-hand lane and do a U at the bottom of the hill. So, look, it's a simple fix in my opinion in regard to being able to go along and just either shorten the overtaking lane or remove the overtaking lane completely, and put in some side friction so that those people that just have come off the overtaking lanes then feel restricted and slows their speed down, so that we can then go along and have some sensible speeds going past the school, which allows the buses and cars to get out.
If I could just answer that one to begin with, Wayne, I came and met with the principal, and she was going to have someone here tonight, but she said their major issue is that people come in, and in the entranceway where the parents should be dropping off children, cars stop and block the entranceway as well. And so her concern was making sure that we kept that free as we possibly can. And getting the passing lane, the one that comes up from Namawahine, it stops too quickly, so there's really not much room to actually get round it. But for and it's the one school that isn't in the road safety program at the moment, and it would be great if it was. Any further questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, good evening. I'm a resident of Belk Road. I take my life in my hands every time I turn right on Tauranga. But what's very frustrating is that as I come down the hill and past the chipboard factory, 20 metres away is a beautifully constructed road that would take me back into the back of the commercial area. Why can't I use that? I know it's going to go to the factory, but nonetheless, it would be much safer.
We'll talk to you about that one later, because it's a bit like Gargan Road. How can we get those roads open so that people can use them in the meantime? And Simeon, the one other thing we've got is the congestion on State Highway 29. Parents no longer take their children into town for after-school activities because you can't get home. Anne Henry, one of our councillors, said this morning, the congestion between, what road was it, Anne?
From Pokamara, that was good because it's usually at Hoyer's school all the way into.
And it took her so long, she said, I'm tempted to stay at home and do all the council meetings on Zoom. Tracy took me home the other day, and on State Highway 2, they're bumper to bumper, and we didn't get home till about 6 o'clock. It's just, and you've got to learn how to dog route, but that's State Highway 2. We'll do a meeting for that one next on. And so, in the meantime...
Fridays.
Yeah.
Simeon's coming back on Friday.
I'm back on Friday if anyone misses me.
Right. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank you all. First of all, I'd like to thank our speakers. I just think you've been wonderful. And it was exactly what Denise and Nicola said to me at Kumi Road, and I thought we've got to do something. So girls, we've done it. All right? So a round of applause for them again. To you, Simeon, thank you very much for coming down, and we hope you have a safe trip home. All right, and Sam and Tom, thank you for coming as well. Ken Shirley, talented fellow, and we have high hopes for him to have an influence at that Transport Regional Committee, because our Road Safety Committee, which we used to have, has been wiped. And it's all gone up to the Regional Council, so of course you never hear anything from them, and we've got to get that back again. So to all of you, to my fellow councillors, thank you for coming tonight. Wasn't easy. Lorraine for the tinging of the bell, thank you. For Don for actually writing up all that's got to be said. Gary for actually doing all these videos, and Jason Marrow, he must be here tonight, he was. Saw him coming in late. Where are you, Jason? Oh, great, right at the back. And he can work with Gary, and I'll give you the details of where you go to Sam Calloway and who we should give him to talk to. Obviously, Debbie Marshall would be at the top of the line, and we'll work on it. So thank you very much indeed.
Margaret, just before you close off, look, you've heard the passion from the lady. I've sat in the chamber for 15 years. Outstanding advocate for the health, so let's put our hands together.
Thank you. And in coming tonight, they actually listened. That's what I thought was so special. Thank you.